The sun burned down over the prairie town of Rustwood, painting the dirt road in molten shades of orange and gold. The air was thick with dust and judgment as Amelia stood outside the general store, her arms clutching a worn bundle of clothes and her chin trembling with disbelief. She wasn't stupid. She'd heard the whispers in town for months, how she'd let herself go, how her hips had widened since the baby, how Royce had stopped looking at her the way husbands should look at wives. But she never expected this. Not this, her husband, had traded her. Not metaphorically, literally. Royce Lancaster, handsome and hollow, stood across the street shaking hands with a trapper. The man wore a coonskin cap and a long coat stitched from fox pelts. He was tying a new saddle, her saddle, to the back of his mule. In return, Royce had tossed Amelia's satchel at her feet and walked away, not even sparing her a glance. Too fat for a ranch wife, he'd grunted earlier that morning. You eat more than you haul. You ain't what I bargained for. She didn't cry. Not then. She just stood there, her body burning hotter than the sun, her heart thudding inside her chest like it wanted to escape too. The townspeople watched, with thinly veiled pity or worse amusement. Some women turned their heads, pretending not to see. A few men chuckled into their whiskey flasks. No one stepped in. No one dared. Rustwood was a town that minded its business, even when cruelty was playing out in plain sight. Amelia's dress clung to her in all the places. She'd been taught to be ashamed of hips too wide, arms too soft, belly too round. She wasn't small, and she never had been. She bore the weight of hard work, of stillbirths, of long winters and scarce harvests. Her body carried stories, none of which Royce ever cared to hear. She sank down onto the edge of the wooden porch, her mind reeling, the sun casting cruel shadows across her flushed cheeks. That's when she noticed the stranger, across the way. Leaning on the hitching post outside the feed store stood a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't look at her with pity nor disgust, just quiet curiosity. His name, though she didn't know it yet, was Elias Boone. And he had 5 children back on his homestead and no one to help raise them. He'd lost his wife 2 winters ago to pneumonia. Since then, the ranch had grown colder, quieter. The children, ranging from toddlers to nearly grown, had learned to cook, clean, and carry burdens too big for their shoulders. Elias managed what he could, but his spirit had worn thin. He had come to town for nails and a spare part for the windmill. But what he found was something else entirely. A woman thrown away. Like garbage in the middle of a dust-covered street. Amelia tried to stand, but her legs gave way. She sank back down. The shame clung to her skin like a second dress. She wished she could disappear, to melt into the planks of the porch and never be seen again. But Elia stepped forward, not quickly, not boldly, just with the kind of careful patience you'd use when approaching a wounded animal. He stopped a few feet away from her and took off his hat. "Ma'am," he said, voice gravel and honey, "you all right?" Amelia blinked up at him, confused. The trapper was already gone. Royce was laughing with someone near the saloon. No one had spoken to her, really spoken to her, in hours. Maybe longer. She cleared her throat. "No," she whispered. "Not really." Elias nodded slowly, like he understood more than she said. He looked around at the townspeople still pretending to be busy, then back at her. "You got any place to go?" "No." "You got kin?" Dead. Silence hung between them. The wind stirred her dress, lifted the hem slightly, like even the prairie was trying to comfort her. Then he said something so unexpected, so gentle. She thought for a moment she must have misheard it. "I've got 5 young'uns," he said quietly. "They need a woman's care. And I reckon you could use a home." Amelia looked up into his eyes, expecting a trick, a joke, a cruel punchline. But there was only truth and loneliness. She didn't know it yet, but this man would offer her more than shelter. He'd offer her something she never thought she'd earn again, not after Royce. Not after being traded like a horse. He would offer her a second chance. The wagon creaked beneath them as the prairie rolled by in golden silence. Amelia sat on the passenger bench, clutching her bundle of clothes in her lap, the fabric bunched tight in her fists. Elias Boone hadn't said much since they left Rustwood. He didn't have to. His offer had been plain. No promises, no fancy words. Just a home, if she wanted one. And Lord, how she wanted one. Still, doubt lingered like smoke in the back of her throat. Men didn't just offer kindness without wanting something in return. Not in her world. Not after Royce. Elias glanced over, as if sensing her thoughts. "You don't owe me nothin', Miss Amelia," he said in that low, unhurried drawl. "I asked you to come 'cause my children need raisin', and I can't do it alone no more." She turned toward him, startled he'd used her name. "How? Did you know who I was?" "I asked the storekeep," he said simply. "Didn't think it right, bringing a stranger home without at least knowing her name." Amelia stared down at her lap. "I suppose that makes me a stranger no longer," Elias smiled softly. "You ain't a stranger to hardship. That much I can tell." They traveled in silence for another mile, the sound of horseshoes against hard packed earth rhythmically echoing in the still air. The horizon began to change, grasslands giving way to wildflowers and soft hills. In the distance, she spotted a ranch house, weather-beaten but sturdy. Nestled beneath a stand of cottonwoods. As they approached, 5 little faces peeked out from the front porch. Boys and girls, ages staggered like stairs, one barely older. Then a toddler, another looking nearly grown. Their eyes, wide and cautious, locked on the wagon like it carried treasure or trouble. Elias slowed the team and climbed down first. He didn't rush to open her door. He just waited, offering her the chance to change her mind. Amelia stepped down on her own, though her legs trembled. Dust clung to her boots. Her heart beat like a drum. The children didn't run to her. They didn't smile. They didn't speak. They just stood there like a jury waiting to decide her fate. Elias cleared his throat. "Young'uns, this here is Miss Amelia. She be stayin' with us a spell." The oldest, a boy with the same slate-blue eyes as his father, crossed his arms and narrowed his gaze. "Is she a cook?" he asked flatly. "She's more than that," Elia said firmly. "She's gonna help out around the house, look after things. Maybe teach you a thing or two about manners." The boy said nothing more, but Amelia could tell he wasn't sold. One of the younger girls, a freckled thing with tangled braids, tugged her sister's sleeve and whispered, "Is she our new mama?" Amelia's throat closed up. She looked to Elias, who met her eyes briefly before answering the child. "No one's replacing your mama," he said gently. "But we got room for kindness here, and maybe some new beginnings." They ate dinner that night at a table built for 7, though only 6 were present in body. The children chewed in silence. Elias sipped coffee. Amelia ladled stew from a pot she hadn't cooked and didn't taste. Every clink of spoon against bowl echoed like thunder. Afterward, she volunteered to wash the dishes. Her hands, red from the scalding water, moved in a rhythm she hadn't felt in months. It was menial work, but it steadied her something solid. After a world turned sideways, later, as the children were tucked into bed by their oldest sibling who still hadn't told her his name, Amelia stepped outside to catch her breath. The stars above stretched endlessly, clean and cold. A sky bigger than any she'd ever seen. Elias joined her on the porch, lighting a pipe but never offering it, just standing beside her like a silent sentinel. "You sure about this?" she asked, finally breaking the stillness. "Bringing a woman like me into your home? A woman cast off like I was?" He took a slow drag and exhaled toward the moon. "You ain't cast off here, Amelia. Not to me." And not to them kids, not yet anyhow. But you'll have to earn their trust. They've been let down too many times. She nodded, understanding more than he realized. So have I? He looked at her, then, with something quiet in his eyes. Not love, not yet, but maybe the bones of it. The makings. Then maybe we're not so different, he murmured. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Amelia didn't feel like a burden. She felt like someone who'd been chosen. Morning light spilled across the Boone homestead, casting gold through the kitchen window. Amelia stood over the stove, turning biscuits in a heavy skillet. She wore an apron that hung a little tight around her waist and boots that weren't. Hers a half size too big. Nothing quite fit, yet neither the clothes nor the life. Behind her, the floorboards creaked as small feet shuffled in. 5 children, each unsure of their place with her, now moved like quiet shadows across the room. No one spoke much, not even Elias, who'd already saddled a horse and disappeared into the barn before breakfast. The house felt thick with WATCHFULNESS. Amelia served them without fanfare fresh eggs, skillet biscuits, and canned peaches she found in the cellar. The food was simple, but it was warm, nourishing. Something told her they hadn't had a full meal in days. Eat up, she said gently, setting a plate in front of the youngest girl, who looked about 4, with hair the color of ripe wheat. And wide, silent eyes. The child stared at the plate, then up at Amelia. I'm not going to take it away, Amelia said, crouching down. It's yours. The girl didn't speak, but slowly she picked up her spoon and took a bite. Her name, Amelia remembered from Elias, was Clara. The others, James, the oldest, Elia, the artist, Caleb, the quiet boy. And little Henry watched, without comment, as Clara ate. Then, like a signal had been given, they all followed suit. No one said thank you. But no one left food on the plate either. After breakfast, Amelia cleaned up while the children scattered to their chores. Elias reappeared near mid-morning, brushing straw from his shoulders and wiping sweat from his brow. He poured himself coffee and lingered in the kitchen doorway. They're still not talking to me, Amelia said, not turning around. They don't talk to me much either, Elias replied. James tries to play strong, but he's just a boy wearing a man's boots. Clara hasn't said a word since their mama passed. Amelia's heart twisted. I didn't come here to replace her. Elias stepped further inside, setting down his mug. No, you didn't, but they don't know what you came for yet. They've been braced for people to leave for a long time. She looked up at him. And you? You think I'll leave too? Elias hesitated. I think you've already stayed longer than most would have. He left her with that, and the sound of the back door clicking shut echoed louder than it should have. That afternoon, Amelia took a walk behind the house, down past the barn and the windmill that creaked with every turn. There, tucked in a thicket of wild rose and mesquite, was a small wooden cross. The name Maribel Boone was carved in it, weather-worn and careful. She knelt beside it, brushing leaves from the base, and placed a wildflower on the earth. I'm not here to take your place, she whispered, but I'll try to keep them safe. Behind her, a voice startled her. You found Mama's grave. Amelia turned. It was Elia, the middle child, maybe 10 years old, holding a sketchbook tight to her chest. She had sharp eyes and a streak of stubbornness in her chin. I did, Amelia said softly. Elia stepped closer, cautious but curious. She used to plant flowers here. Nothing grew after she died. Maybe it just needed someone to believe in it again, Amelia replied. Elia studied her. Are you going to marry Papa? Amelia blinked. No. I mean, I don't know. I didn't come for that. Elia nodded like she didn't believe her but didn't press. Instead, she opened her sketchbook and flipped through it. The pages were filled with pencil drawings of animals of the ranch, of a woman holding a baby. That one's Mama, Elia said. "I draw her so I don't forget her." Amelia crouched down beside her. "She looks kind?" "She was," Elia said, her voice barely a breath. They sat there together in the tall grass, two women, one grown, one not quite, in the silence of a world that had moved on too quickly. When they returned to the house that evening, Elia handed Amelia a folded paper. Inside was a sketch, 5 small children and a woman with a braid standing behind them. No names, no faces, just outlines. But Amelia recognized herself in it anyway. She didn't frame it. She didn't cry, but she slipped it into her apron pocket and touched it often, as if it were proof that maybe, just maybe, she belonged. The Boone Ranch wasn't grand, but it was full of ghosts. Amelia felt them in the floorboards, heard them in the hush between a child's sigh and a windmill's creak. They lived in the worn quilt folded neatly at the end of the couch, and in the chipped porcelain dishes that still bore delicate hand-painted roses, reminders of a woman who once made this house feel alive. She had expected to find a home that needed mending. What she hadn't expected was how much the house would resist her. The children kept their distance. James, the eldest, watched her with a cold kind of suspicion, as if she were another storm cloud creeping toward their battered horizon. Caleb rarely spoke, but his eyes darted whenever she entered a room. Even sweet Clara, the little one who had clung to her biscuit days before, now hid behind furniture when Amelia passed too close. And Elias? He kept to the barn mostly. When he did come in for supper, he said grace in a low, steady voice, chewed methodically, and answered her questions, with either a nod or a "reckon so." His grief wasn't loud, but it hung on him like dust he didn't bother brushing off. Still, Amelia tried each morning. She woke before sunrise, kneading dough for biscuits, boiling coffee strong enough to rattle the windows, and slicing apples for a pie that always seemed to disappear by nightfall, though no one ever said thank you. She washed clothes with a worn scrub board that bit at her knuckles, patched Caleb's overalls, and fixed a splintered chair leg using glue and borrowed patience. But despite her efforts, every step felt like walking through a field of thornbrush, quiet, dangerous, and slow. One afternoon, while sorting through a battered cabinet in the pantry, Amelia found an old recipe card. The handwriting was loopy and soft, and the words made her stop breathing for a moment. Marable's cinnamon bread, extra sugar for the little ones. She turned it over with trembling fingers. There were faint flower prints still clinging to the corner. Amelia stared at it for a long time, then set to work. That evening, the scent of cinnamon filled the house like a warm blanket. Clara wandered in first, nose twitching, eyes wide. Then Henry, thumb in mouth, barefoot and curious. Even Caleb hovered near the table, pretending to need a cup of water. Elia stepped in last. His eyes flicked to the oven, then to her. "I found your wife's recipe," Amelia said, wiping her hands. "Hope you don't mind." Elias said nothing for a beat. Then, "Ain't my recipe to mind." The bread came out golden and steaming, its sugar crust crackling beneath the knife. Amelia cut thick slices and set them on chipped plates. No one spoke as they ate. No one needed to. It was the first time in days the kitchen felt full, not just of people, but of something else. Something softer. Afterward, as the children scattered like leaves on a breeze, Elias lingered by the sink. He didn't look at her when he spoke. You didn't have to do that. "I wanted to," she replied. She was a good cook, Maribel. She used to hum while she stirred things. His voice was sandpaper and sorrow. When she died, none of us could stand the smell of cinnamon. Seemed like it belonged to her. Amelia wiped her hands on her apron and met his gaze. "Does it still?" He studied her for a moment. "Then," he said softly. "No, I reckon it don't." She nodded. That was enough. That night, After the children were tucked in and the dishes cleaned, Amelia sat at the kitchen table alone. Her back ached. Her apron was damp with flour and dishwater. But she felt steadier, as if the floorboards weren't fighting her quite as hard anymore. Then she heard it, a sound barely there like breath caught in a dream. She turned. Clara stood in the hallway, her nightgown hanging off one tiny shoulder. In her hand was a small drawing, a house, a stick-figure family, and a woman with long hair holding hands with 5 children. Clara stepped forward and whispered, "Mama used to sing. Do you sing?" Amelia's throat tightened. "Sometimes," she said gently. "Would you like me to?" Clara nodded so Amelia hummed a lullaby. Her own mother once sang, and the little girl climbed into her lap without another word as the stars blinked. To life above the Boone Ranch, the kitchen that had once been full of silence now held something new, not joy. Not yet, but the start of it. The days on the Boone Ranch rolled by like clouds across a prairie sky slow, heavy, but changing nonetheless. Each morning, Amelia woke to the sound of boots thudding across floorboards, the creak of the windmill, and the soft rustle of Clara's little feet padding into the kitchen in search of warmth and cinnamon. The girl no longer hid. Sometimes she even smiled, but James, the eldest, still held his silence like a shield. He'd nod politely when spoken to, do his chores with diligence, and eat every bite on his plate, but not once had he called her anything other than ma'am. And when the other children began to open up, James seemed to retreat deeper, as if their laughter betrayed something sacred. Amelia noticed. She noticed everything. So she stitched late into the nights, after the dishes were clean and the lanterns turned low. She sat near the fire with a basket of thread and fabric remnants left behind in trunks and drawers, some so old the colors had faded into whispers. Her fingers moved steady, sewing life into what had been forgotten. It reminded her of who she was before Royce, before being traded like cattle, before shame rewrote her worth. By the 3rd week, she had something to show for it. "Elia," she said one morning, "come here a moment." The girl, halfway out the door with a sack of chicken feed, turned on her heel. Her brows lifted when she saw Amelia holding a folded piece of calico cloth neatly pressed. "What's that?" she asked, stepping closer. Amelia smiled. "A dress. For you?" Evia's mouth opened, then closed. She took the dress like it was made of glass. It was sky blue, with hand-stitched flowers along the hem and a wide sash that tied in the back. The kind of dress a girl might wear for Sunday supper or a county fair. "I haven't had a new dress since Mama." She stopped, cheeks flushing. Amelia reached out, gently tucking a loose braid behind Evia's ear. "It's all right. I don't want to take her place. I just want you to have things that make you feel special." Evia nodded and clutched the dress to her chest, eyes shining. "Thank you." That night, Amelia found a folded paper tucked into her sewing basket. Another drawing. This time it was of her seated by the fire, sewing, surrounded by smiling children. The details were tender. Her braid over one shoulder, Clara curled by her feet, the boys in the background stacking kindling. She ran her fingers over the pencil lines, heart full, but just as warmth settled in her chest, she heard shouting from the barn. Elias and James. She hurried outside, under the lantern's yellow glow. James stood stiff, fists clenched. Elias towered over him, arms crossed, his voice low but firm. "You don't speak to her that way," Elias growled. "She's earned more respect than that." "She's not our mother," James shouted, his voice cracking. "You don't get to bring someone in and pretend like we're a family again. She's just a stranger you fed." Amelia froze at the edge of the barn door. Elias didn't flinch. "She may not be your mother, but she's got more heart than most women I've ever met. You'll learn to see that, or you'll Be working double until you do." James stormed past her without looking, brushing her shoulder hard as he went. Elias noticed her and exhaled sharply, guilt softening his jaw. "I'm sorry," he said. He's hurting. We all are. But I won't let him take it out on you." Amelia shook her head. "He's a boy grieving in a man's world. I understand." They stood in silence for a beat. Crickets chirped in the grass. Somewhere, out in the dark, a coyote howled. Elias turned to her. "You didn't have to make that dress." "I know," she said. "But it felt good to give something." He studied her in that long, thoughtful way of his, like she was a poem he couldn't quite finish reading. "You give more than you take," he said quietly. "You remind me what a home is supposed to feel like." The words caught her off guard, but she didn't retreat. She just nodded, and for a moment, she thought maybe, just maybe, he might reach out and touch her hand. But he didn't single quotes T. Instead. He tipped his hat and said, "Get some rest, Miss Amelia. You've had a long day." She watched him disappear into the barn shadows, and as she turned back toward the house, the drawing still tucked in her apron pocket, she whispered to the night, "So have you, Elias Boone. So have you." The sky hung low and heavy, that morning, gray as wet ash, with a wind that whispered warnings through the cottonwoods. Amelia felt it before she saw him. That old, familiar tightness in her chest. That instinct that something was wrong. She was out near the chicken coop, apron full of eggs, when she heard the hoofbeats. Not the steady rhythm of Elias returning from the fields, but a single rider charging hard. When she turned, the basket slipped from her hands. Royce. He looked worse than she remembered. His face was weathered, eyes bloodshot and restless. A bottle hung half empty from one hand, and the other gripped the reins with jerky force. His horse was lathered with sweat, its mouth foaming from the hard ride. He pulled up roughly outside the house, swaying slightly as he dismounted. "Well, I'll be damned," he slurred, staring at her like she was something he'd misplaced. And just now remembered he missed. There she is, my wife. Amelia's feet were rooted, but her voice came steady. "Not anymore." "You don't get to say that," he snapped, stepping forward. "I traded you, sure. But I didn't say nothing about permanent. You think you can just disappear and play house with some dusty old widower?" "I didn't disappear," she said. "You gave me away." His face twisted. "That was a mistake, one I intend to fix." Behind her, the screen door slammed open. Elias, he didn't shout, he didn't reach for his rifle. He just walked down the steps with that slow, controlled purpose Amelia had come to recognize. His hands were at his sides, but his eyes, blue-gray and cold as winter, were steel. "You've got no business here," Elia said. "You lost your claim the day you traded her like a sack of grain," Royce sneered. "She's my wife. She's a free woman." Royce's jaw twitched. "You think tacking her and makes her yours? That don't change nothin'. You can't just have what ain't yours." Elias stepped between them. "I didn't take her. She chose to stay." Royce's hand twitched toward his coat. For a moment, Amelia feared he might have a weapon. But instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, damp with sweat and whiskey. "I got a preacher's certificate says she's mine. Law don't change just 'cause you've got chickens and orphans." Amelia stepped forward. Her voice cut through the space between the two men. "You traded me for a saddle and a bottle. Royce, you signed my life away in front of half of Rustwood. That preacher's paper won't change what everyone saw you do." Royce didn't look at her. He couldn't. He turned back to Elias instead, as if he were the real threat now. "You think she's worth it? You think a woman like her can carry your name without dragging it down?" Elias didn't blink. "I think she's carried more weight on her back, in her heart, and on her soul than any man ever gave her credit. For, including you." Royce opened his mouth again, but this time a firm voice cut across the yard. "Get off our land." James. The boy stood near the barn, a pitchfork in his hands, legs shaking but jaw clenched tight. His siblings hovered behind him, their eyes wide but focused. Clara clutched Evia's dress. Caleb stood tall beside them. Royce looked at the children, then at Elias, and finally at Amelia. He saw something then, something he hadn't expected. Loyalty. He spat in the dirt. "You'll regret this," he muttered, turning back toward his horse. Elias didn't respond. He waited until Royce rode off down the road, unsteady in the saddle, a shadow shrinking into the dust. When he was gone, the air changed. Elias turned to Amelia. "You all right?" She nodded, though her heart was still racing. "I didn't expect him to come back." "I did," Elias said, "but I also knew he'd leave alone." The children gathered near her. James didn't say much, but he lingered the longest, his eyes darting between her and Elias. Finally he muttered, "We would have helped if he'd tried anything." Amelia reached out and touched his arm, just briefly. "Thank you." Later. That evening, as the family sat down for supper, Clara slid a drawing into Amelia's lap. It was of Royce on a horse, riding away. Above it, scrawled in uneven letters, were the words, "Mama is home." Amelia pressed the picture to her chest and smiled. For the first time in her life, being wanted wasn't a curse, it was a choice. And someone had finally chosen her back. The storm rolled in fast, sweeping over the plains with a wind so fierce it bent the trees sideways and made the barn doors rattle on their hinges. Amelia moved through the kitchen quickly, bolting windows, gathering candles, and calming Clara, who clung to her leg like a kitten startled by thunder. Elias came in soaked to the bone, brushing rain from his hat. "Roof will hold," he said, voice low. "Barn's tied down. Animals are safe. Let's ride it out." The storm wasn't the kind that passed in minutes. It came to stay, lightning slicing the sky in jagged lines, rain pounding the roof like hoofbeats, wind howling like coyotes. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, Noah, the second youngest boy with sandy hair and wide eyes, collapsed beside the fireplace with a whimper. Amelia was at his side in seconds. "He's burning up," she said, touching his forehead. "Has he been coughing?" "Past couple days," James muttered, crouching beside her. "Didn't want to say nothin'. Thought he'd get better." Elias kneeled beside his son, his jaw set in that quiet, helpless way men wear when they can't fix what matters most. He had croup once. Maribel used to boil herbs, wrap his chest. I don't remember what kind. Amelia took charge without hesitation. "Get me water." "Boil it. I'll crush thyme and sage from the pantry. We'll steam it in a cloth for his chest." James ran to help. Evie fetched towels. Even little Clara held Amelia's apron tightly, whispering, "Make him better, Mama." The word hit Amelia like thunder. Mama. It wasn't the first time one of them had said it, but it was the first time it landed so deep she felt it in her ribs. She didn't correct her. She didn't look at Elias. She just nodded and whispered, "I'll try." For the next few hours, the house became a quiet storm of its own. The wind shrieked outside, but inside there was only the soft boiling of water, the rustle of cloth, the whispered prayers of children, and the low, rasping breaths of a sick boy. Amelia didn't leave Noah's side. She dabbed his forehead with cool water, cradled his head when he shivered, and hummed a lullaby under her breath, one her mother used to sing when fevers ran hot and hope felt thin. Elias sat across from her in silence, watching. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, but something passed between them in that storm-lit room, a quiet agreement, sealed not with words, but with presence. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was his partner. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside lay soaked and hushed, steam rising off the soaked fields like the land itself was exhaling. Inside, Noah's breathing had eased. His cheeks were flushed, but his fever had broken. Amelia slumped in a chair beside the hearth, exhausted. Elias placed a blanket over her shoulders. You stayed up all night. I wasn't going to leave him. I know, he said, voice rough. Neither would she. Amelia looked at him, surprised. Elias took off his hat, running a hand through his rain-damp hair. I wasn't sure if the kids would ever smile again. Wasn't sure I would, truth be told. But you've brought something back to this place. She shook her head. I didn't do anything special. You stayed, he said simply. That's more than most folks ever do. They sat in silence as the sky turned pale pink, the sun cutting through storm clouds like forgiveness. Later that morning, as Amelia stirred porridge at the stove, James walked in holding something behind his back. I fixed this for you, he muttered, pulling out a repaired chair leg from the one that always wobbled. Saw you struggle with it, Amelia blinked. Thank you, he shrugged, uncomfortable. Figured it's what, someone who's staying might need. She smiled real, warm, and without hesitation. Then I guess I'm staying, she said. He didn't reply. But he stayed in the kitchen while she cooked, and that said more than any words could. That night, after Noah fell asleep curled beside her like a cat, and Elias leaned his shoulder against the doorframe just to watch her work, Amelia whispered to herself, maybe storms don't just break things. Maybe they show you what's worth holding on to. By mid-April, the earth had softened, and the world around the Boone Ranch began to breathe again. The wild grasses were greener, the air sweeter, and for the first time in years, there was laughter in the yard. Not loud. Not wild. Just a soft giggle from Clara as she chased a chicken barefoot, Evia sketching flowers in the dirt, and Caleb letting Amelia braid his hair. Just once. Even though he said it tickled. Elias watched it all from the porch, arms crossed, his hat tipped low to hide the growing smile he never used to wear. It wasn't just the house that had changed. It was the land. Amelia had begun to make it hers. One morning, after breakfast and chores, she asked Elias if he had any seed. He raised an eyebrow. What kind? All kinds, she said, pulling her hair back with a scrap of ribbon. I want to plant a garden, a real one. Not just herbs and onions, something pretty, something blooming. He studied her for a moment as if weighing what she meant beneath the words. Then he nodded toward the shed. There's a box of old seed packets. Most are dried out. Might not take. She smiled. They've been sitting still too long. So have I? Out behind the barn, where weeds and broken tools had taken over, Amelia cleared a patch of hard ground. The work was slow. She used a rusted hoe and her own 2 hands, digging through years of neglect. Blisters bloomed on her palms. Sweat soaked her dress, but she didn't stop. The children began to help. At first, it was small Henry handing her rocks, Evie making signs for the rows with painted sticks. Then James appeared one afternoon, silently setting up a fence with Caleb to keep the goats from trampling the sprouts. Elias brought her water. Just water, no words. But when she caught him lingering, watching her plant rows of marigolds and snap peas, he didn't look away. You're growing more than vegetables, he said one evening, watching her hands press soil around a young green stem. I'm trying, she said, brushing dirt from her apron. It helps me forget how I was. Left? Elias took a long breath. Funny thing, you talk like someone who is abandoned. But when I look at you now, all I see is someone who is finally found. She looked up at him, startled. He tipped his hat, almost shy, and walked away before she could answer. 1 week later, tiny green shoots broke through the dirt. The children cheered like they'd struck gold. Clara named every sprout. This one's Miss Button. That one's Sheriff P. Evia drew the garden in full bloom before it even had leaves. "I want to remember what it's going to look like," she said, her eyes shining. At supper, James offered to build a scarecrow. "You think birds'll come?" he asked Amelia directly, his voice no longer guarded. "Birds, rabbits, all kinds of trouble," she said, smiling. "We'll fight them off, like a team." He grinned, just barely, after the dishes were washed and the children tucked into bed. Elias joined Amelia outside in the warm dusk. Fireflies blinked lazily over the grass. The garden glowed in the moonlight, its rows tidy and full of promise. "I never said thank you," Elias murmured. "For what?" "For breathing life back into this place, into them." She leaned against the porch rail, wiping dirt from her arms with a cloth. "They had the life in them already. I just gave it permission to bloom." He looked at her then, really looked at the curve of her shoulders, the strength in her hands, the softness in her eyes that hadn't been there weeks ago. "You gave me permission too," he said quietly, "to start over." The night was still, the air warm, the distance between them smaller than it had ever been. And in the gentle hush, Elias reached out slow and careful and took her hand. Her fingers trembled in his. "I don't know what this is yet," she whispered. "But it doesn't feel like pity." "It's not," he said. "It feels like hope." In the dirt behind the barn, marigolds bloomed brighter the next morning. And in the Boone house, something else was blooming too. Not love, not yet, but the fertile ground for it. The mirror in the Boone house was small and cracked, hung crooked above a washstand in the hallway. Amelia had avoided it since the day she arrived, not out of vanity, but out of memory. It was a mirror that had once told her everything wrong. With her, the softness of her belly, the broadness of her shoulders, the way her dresses pulled too tight across her hips. But this morning, as the sun lit the house with warm gold and the smell of baking bread drifted through the rooms, she stopped in front of it. She didn't look away this time. She saw her full figure, her round arms, her sun-flushed cheeks. And for once, she didn't feel shame. She didn't think of Royce and the way he used to poke her sides and joke about all that extra freight. She didn't think of the Snickers at the general store or the glances from women who pinched their waists like it was their duty. What she thought of was Clara's laugh when she spun around in a circle, James fixing the broken fence without being asked, Elias handing her a sprig of thyme with calloused hands and no words. Just that look that said he saw her. Amelia touched the side of her face in the mirror. She looked like someone who belonged. Later that afternoon, Elias hitched up the wagon for a trip into Rustwood. Supplies were running low. Coffee, flour, nails for the chicken coop. "I'll go," Amelia said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I need to pick up fabric. Evia's outgrowing her dresses." Elias hesitated. "You sure?" She nodded. "I need to go back, on my own terms." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he handed her the reins. Rustwood hadn't changed. The same boards creaked beneath her boots. The same shopkeeper gave her that same raised eyebrow when she stepped inside, but she stood taller this time. She moved slower, not with hesitation, but with purpose. She bought flour and coffee. She picked out fabric, a deep lilac for Evia, sturdy denim for the boys, a soft floral bolt for herself. When she turned to pay, the shopkeeper narrowed his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you back here," he muttered. Amelia folded her arms. "Didn't expect to come back. But life doesn't ask permission, does it?" He grunted, but took her coin. She was halfway out the door when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, look who's come crawling back." Royce. He was sitting outside the saloon, a bottle dangling from one hand and a smirk smeared across his face. His clothes were more ragged now, his eyes sunken, beard patchy. A man rotting from the inside out. Amelia didn't stop walking. "You." Think you found a better life with that sad old rancher? Royce called after her. You're still the same, still soft, still too much. She turned then, not out of anger, but out of finality. I used to think I was too much, she said, her voice calm but clear. Now I know I was just too much. For a man like you. Royce stood up, stumbling. You think he loves you? I know he respects me, she said. And I'd take 1 ounce of respect over a gallon of your sorry kind of love. She turned and walked away, head high, heart steady. When she returned to the ranch that evening, Clara ran to meet her at the gate. Did you bring thread for my dolly's dress? She asked. I brought thread, ribbon, and enough fabric, too. Make a whole wardrobe, Amelia laughed, scooping her up. Elias stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Town treat you all right? Town is what it is, she said. But it doesn't own me anymore. They locked eyes. And this time, she didn't look away. After supper, the family sat around the fire. James played a tune on his harmonica. Elia stitched beside Amelia. The boys told jokes too loud, and Clara snored softly in Amelia's lap. Elias leaned close and spoke so only she could hear. You ever think about staying? Not just for the kids? For yourself? For me? Amelia looked at him, tears pricking her eyes not from sadness, but from something sweeter. I've already stayed, she whispered. Now I'm just waiting for you to ask me to stay forever. Elia smiled, and this time he reached for her hand and didn't let go. She hadn't lost her worth. She'd only been with someone too blind to see it. And now, in this house with this man and these children, she was finally becoming who she was always meant to be. The Boone Ranch bloomed under the spring sun. The garden Amelia had planted now sang with color-golden marigolds, thick-stemmed peas, tomato vines curling toward the sky. The children ran, barefoot through the rows, laughter trailing behind them like ribbon. Even the chickens seemed plumper. The place felt full. Fed. Elias had taken to rising early just to sit with Amelia on the porch before the others stirred. No words, no rush, just coffee, silence, and the kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. But one morning, Elias cleared his throat and said something that made her heart stop. I sent for the preacher. She turned. For what? He stared into the rising sun. To ask you the right way this time. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. I didn't bring you here to save us, he went on, voice low. But you did. You made this house a home again. You gave the children their smiles back. You gave me my soul back. I don't want you here out of kindness, Amelia. I want you here as my wife. She didn't speak at first. Just stared at the man whose steadiness had healed her more than any medicine could. Then, tears in her eyes, she said, I never thought I'd hear someone ask me that and mean it. He smiled. I mean every word. They married beneath the cottonwood tree, not far from where Maribel Boone was buried. Amelia had insisted they do it there, not to replace her, but to honor her. A woman whose memory still lingered in every corner of the house, not as competition, but as part of the legacy Amelia was now helping continue. Clara carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Evie wore her new lilac dress. James stood tall beside Elias, trying not to cry. Amelia wore a cream-colored dress sewn from fabric Evie helped pick out. It didn't hide her curves, it celebrated them. And when Elias took her hands in front of the preacher and said, With all I am, no one in the yard doubted he meant every word. After the ceremony, they didn't have music or cake or guests, but they had laughter, lemonade, and a supper that stretched long into the evening. Elias lifted his cup and said, To the woman who saved this family by being exactly who she is. The children echoed it with grins and raised cups, even little Henry, who spilled half his milk, and Amelia, full to the brim with something she never thought she'd have again, whispered to herself, I am enough. That night, after the children were tucked in and the lamps dimmed low, Elias and Amelia stood on the porch. The stars blinked quietly above, and a breeze carried the scent of mint from the garden. "You ever think about how this all started?" he asked. She laughed softly. "How a man took one look at me and saw a burden." "No," Elias said. "How one man was foolish enough to give up what another man would spend his whole life praying to find." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You never made me feel like I had to change." "I never wanted you to," he said. "You came into this house with arms full of care and a heart strong enough to carry us all. I'd be a fool to ask for anything else." They stood there for a while, rocking gently, hand in hand. Before they went inside, Clara appeared sleepily in the doorway, dragging a blanket and rubbing her eyes. "Can I sleep in your bed tonight, Mama?" Amelia knelt and scooped her into her arms. "Of course, sweetheart." She paused, then turned to Elias. Clara yawned, her voice muffled. "You too, Papa." He froze for just a breath, then smiled. "Wouldn't miss it," he said. And just like that, the woman who had once been thrown away for her size, who had been traded like livestock, bruised by words sharper than fists, who had been told she was too much, too big, too unwanted, became everything. A mother. A wife. The center of a home that was broken until she walked through its door. Not because she lost weight, not because she changed who she was, but because she finally believed that softness could be strength, and that love true, lasting love has room for every curve, every scar, every story.